What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be covering the OP10 leader Marshall D. Teach, or as you probably know him, Blackbeard. This card has had one of the largest impacts to the game in recent history, and he's only getting stronger in OP10, so even if you don't plan on playing him yourself, it's a good idea to learn about these cards so you can figure out how to beat him. Now let's get started. Oh, and one last thing, I'm trying to release a guide every week, so if you want to see more content like this, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. And if there's a leader you'd like to see next, let me know in the comments below. Blackbeard's first ability prevents any of our own on-play effects from activating, but this is only fair since we'll be turning off our opponents. And unlike our opponent, our deck was designed to be played this way, so it's not going to have much of an effect. And speaking of that, our second ability allows us to trash one card, and our opponent's on-play effects will not activate in their next turn. And it's because of this effect he's often called a floodgate or a gatekeeper leader, since he has the power to control whether or not his opponent's on-play effects are going to activate. Moving on to strategy, the first and most obvious one is we want to turn off any of our opponent's powerful on-play effects. Now exactly when we start to do this is going to depend on the leader and what cards we're trying to prevent from activating, but the theme is once we start turning off effects, we're going to continue to do so until either the end of the game or we run out of cards. And because hand management is so important, we don't want to turn off on-play effects just to turn them off. We're doing it to negate powerful effects like Gecko Moria or Luffy Taro. We don't care if on turn number 1 they drop a 1-cost searcher. Our second goal is to stall out the game, using our many removal options to clear our opponent's board and stay as healthy as we can before reaching our 8 to 10 Dawn turns and setting up our win condition. We also want to fill up our trash along the way, as one of our main offensive cards is Jesus Burgess, and he gains 1000 power for every 4 cards in our trash. And this leads up to our final goal, as we want to pair the 4-cost Jesus Burgess with our 10-cost Teach to have a nice balance of offensive pressure and defensive blocking. Our goal is to have 2 Burgesses already down by the time we're ready to drop down our 10-cost Blackbeard, and because we've been filling up our trash, they should be at 8 to 9k power. We then drop down the 10-cost Blackbeard and use his ability to negate our opponent's leader ability, negate one of their characters and prevent them from attacking next turn, and then keeping him up as a blocker as we attack with both our Burgesses. As far as new strategy, there were 5 new cards released in OP10, but really we're focused on 2 of them. That's not to say that this Shiryu and Jesus Burgess aren't valuable cards, but I think they're more niche scenarios, whereas these other 2 we're going to use every single time. Starting with our strongest new addition, this Kuzan allows us to recycle 5-cost and lower Blackbeard cards from our trash, and our favorite target is going to be the 4-cost Burgess. But not only that, he also has the added effect that he cannot be removed by any of our opponent's card effects. This means KOing, trashing, bouncing back to hand, bottom decking, all of them he is immune to. So what does this mean? Well, it means beginning as 5 Dawn, we can drop him down and just leave him on the field until we're ready to bring out our Burgess for our late game strategy. And when we do want to do that, we're going to attack with him, force a counter, get a life, activate his effect, put him into the trash, bring out our Burgess, and then draw a card. And since 2 of the most important things in this deck is getting out our Burgess and maintaining our hand size, having a card that does both while also not being able to be removed from the field really just means that this card is a 11 out of 10. Our second newest addition helps with our board control, as if our opponent has 2 or more characters than us, we can remove a 6-cost or less and a 4-cost or less for only 6 Dawn. And while this isn't quite as impactful as Kuzan, it helps us against leaders that can bring out multiple characters in the same turn, as it will allow us to remove 2 for 1. The rest of these cards have already been here since OP09 and work generally the same way, so if you're already familiar with the leader right now, feel free to jump ahead. But if this is your first time seeing this leader, allow me to break down each card, starting with Lafitte. This is a 1-cost searcher that has the activate main effect to rest him in 1 Dawn, and then look at the top 5 cards of your deck and add 1 Blackbeard card to your hand. This is a great way to start the game, looking for our key missing pieces or specific cards that we want to play in the next few turns. Next up is the start of our removal options, the 2-cost Dock Q, who is the activate main effect. We may rest him, and if our opponent is Blackbeard, KO one of your opponent's 1-cost or lower characters. Generally, we would look to use Dock Q in combination with Van Augur, who is a 5-cost 6k power character with the activate main effect to give -3 to one of your opponent's characters if you rest them. This is a great combo for a 5 Dawn turn, playing Dock Q the turn before, as we're not only disrupting our opponent's board, but developing our own, and even if they're targeted for an attack, we get to draw a card when they're KO'd, and we already know how important hand size is to this leader. We run a few copies of Vasco Shot, which is more of a situational card, and our only blocker outside of the 10-cost Blackbeard. This could also be helpful in the late game if we're already at 10 Dawn, but we want to use a Finger Pistol or Liberation to get rid of one of our opponent's cards, but still establish a blocker on our side of the field. As mentioned before, this card is at the core of our offensive strategy as we build up his power by filling up our trash, and he also cannot be KO'd by our opponent's effects. And finally, the boss card of this deck, a 10-cost, 12k power blocker with the activate main ability as follows. If he was played this turn, choose one of your opponent's leaders and negate their ability for the turn. Then, choose one of their characters, negate their ability, and they cannot attack during their next turn. Most of the time, you just want to use this on their highest powered character, but there could be some cases where one of their cards has a powerful activate main or one attacking effect, so you could use this ability to shut that off as well. Our 1-cost stage has a very powerful effect, allowing us to fill up our trash and improve our hand at the same time by discarding 1 card, looking at the top 3 cards of our deck, and then adding a Blackbeard card to our hand. And the best thing about this card is once we have it down on the field, it doesn't cost anything to activate. This means on a 10 Dawn turn, if we didn't already have a Blackbeard in our hand, we could discard a card, look at the top 3, add a Blackbeard to our hand and still play it on that same turn. This is My Age has a similar effect, looking at the top 3 cards and adding a Blackbeard type to our hand, but rather than going to the bottom of the deck, the cards go into the trash, which helps us with one of our main goals of filling up our trash for Jesus Burgess. Both Finger Pistol and Liberation offer removal options and come with different benefits. Finger Pistol allows us to target a 5-cost character and also fills 2 cards in our trash. It also has a trigger that allows us to activate it, which comes in very handy. While Liberation can only target 4-cost or lower characters, it also negates their effect at the same time, which can be great against cards that have KO effects or other types of protection. It's also a Blackbeard card, which means we can search for it, and while it does have a trigger, this is to negate the effects of one of our opponent's leaders or characters, so oftentimes it won't be that useful. And finally, we can pair these cards with either Van Augur or Stronger's effect in order to target 7 or 8 cost characters. And speaking of which, this deck only runs 8 2k counters. We will almost always use Shiryu as a 2k counter, but there will be times that Stronger can be useful to play, as for 1 Dawn we can give -2 to one of our opponent's characters. This is my starting deck list, but as always, make any changes as you try out this leader yourself and find the cards that work for you. We usually want to go second, but if we are going first, we want to start things off with one of our 1-cost cards. And I would say we prefer This Is My Age, as it allows us to fill up our trash immediately. At 3 Dawn, we can get Doffy on the field and then use another one of our 1-cost cards, or we could play and activate Laffite's effect to search for another card alongside our either 1-cost event or another This Is My Age. At 5 Dawn, things start to get interesting, as we can either play Van Augur and combine him with our Doffy to start some removal. We can get Kuzan on the field if there's nothing that we want to remove, or if we didn't have a Doffy, we could use a Finger Pistol or Liberation to remove something on the board. And if I had to rank these options, I would say using Van Augur and Doffy is ideal if we're going for removal, as we're developing our board at the same time as disrupting theirs. And if there's nothing to remove, Kuzan is our best play. At 5 or 7 Dawn, you might be wondering, if you have both Kuzan and Burgess in your hand, which one should you play? And I would say that unless the 1 Dawn you save by playing the 4-cost Burgess will allow you to activate something else or play another important card, it's almost always worth playing Kuzan instead. This is because by activating his ability, we not only play Burgess, but we also draw 1 card. And I know I've said it before, so I'll say it one last time, hand size is very important with this leader. And while we don't want to attack with Burgess until our later turns, getting him on the field early can subject him to cards that bounce him back to hand or bottom deck him, whereas Kuzan will be fully protected from all of these effects. The most important exception will be on our even Dawn curve, as at 8 Dawn you could play down 2 Jesus Burgesses at the same time, which is going to be ideal rather than playing only 1 Kuzan or 1 Burgess. But moving on to 7 Dawn, our choices are basically the same, with the added of the 6-cost Liberation if our opponent has 2 or more characters than us. At 9 Dawn our options are the same, but now we can activate 2 cards at the same time, so we can either drop down 2 Jesus Burgesses, 1 Jesus and a Finger Pistol, a Jesus and a Kuzan, you get the picture. And finally, at our 10 Dawn turn, we want to start chaining out our 10-cost Teaches, adding blockers to the field, negating our opponent's leader ability, and negating one of their characters and preventing them from attacking. If we are going second, we can start off the game with a Doffy, play and activate Laffite's effect, or use one of our other 1-cost cards. At 4 Dawn, we could play Jesus Burgess just to get him on the field, but you only want to do this if you're confident your opponent won't have anything to get rid of him. And if you didn't want to do this, we could either play down Laffite, play down another Doffy, or activate another one of our 1-cost cards. Since we've swapped out Laboon in favor of Kuzan and OP10, we don't really have a consistent card to play on our 4 Dawn turn. If you didn't like this, feel free to make out some swaps and add in the 4-cost Shiryu, who on play allows you to remove a 3-cost and can be quite nice on the 4 Dawn curve. At 6 Dawn, we gain access to all of our cards outside of the 10-cost Teach, so we can either play Van Augur and Kuzan alongside a 1-cost event or stage, use a Liberation to remove 2 of our opponent's characters, or use a combination of our 4-cost events with our 1 to 2 cost options. At 8 Dawn is where things start to ramp up, as we can drop out 2 Jesus Burgesses on the field at the same time, or if we already had a Kuzan, we could play 1 Burgess alongside a Finger Pistol or Liberation, and then use Kuzan's effect to bring out another Burgess. And then just like before at 10 Dawn, we want to drop down Teach, negate our opponent's leaders, negate one of their characters and prevent them from attacking, and then start attacking with our Burgesses. Blackbeard is a powerful control leader, but just like any other leader in the game, there are some weaknesses, and for this leader specifically, it's countering out 5 to 6k attacks. This is because we run very little counter, and not only that, when we start discarding a card every turn to turn off on-play effects, our hand size can quickly diminish, leaving very few cards for us to counter out with. We also use our removal in order to get rid of cards before they can attack, so any card with Rush is very annoying, as they're going to be able to play and swing a hit before we can get rid of them. So if you're struggling against this leader, rather than focusing on 2k power above, like we'll usually talk about as the magic number, as it requires 2 cards to discard, for Blackbeard, you just want to swing as many 5 to 6k hits as you can get, especially in the first couple of turns. Now, as I've mentioned before, I don't usually recommend Blackbeard to new players, as he becomes more effective the more you know about your opponent and knowing which cards you want to turn off. But luckily you're subscribed to me and watching this video, so I'm going to give you a quick cheat sheet or beginner's guide to understand when to turn off for each common leader. Starting with our hardest matchup, we have to turn off their on plays beginning on their 3 Dawn turn, as we don't want them to use Jinbei to chain out multiple characters. For Black Yellow Luffy, we definitely want to begin on their 8 Dawn turn to prevent Gecko Moria, but depending on the situation you're in, you could start as early as 5 Dawn. The same thing goes for Rob Lucci, and as a general rule, if any black leader that uses Gecko Moria, you want to make sure beginning at 8 Dawn, you turn off their on plays. For Smoker, we also need to shut things off starting at 8 Dawn, but we might have to do it a little earlier if we get our Burgess on the field, as he has access to the 5-cost Tashigi, which can send our Burgess right into the trash beginning on 5 Dawn. For Shanks, we want to turn things off beginning at 7 Dawn, so they don't benefit from the on-play effects of Ben Beckman, Silver's Rayleigh, or Monkey D. Dragon. For Bonnie, we want to turn off beginning on her 7 Dawn turn to ensure she can't use Hody Jones to rest 2 of our characters, or benefit from the 10-cost Doffy to keep 3 of our characters rested. Against PLuffy, we want to turn things off beginning on their 7 Dawn turn, which can happen as early as their 5 Dawn turn if they use their leader ability twice. Against Enel, we want to turn things off beginning on their 8 Dawn turn to remove any benefit from Charlotte Katakuri, Yamato, or Ace to regain life. Against the new Usopp leader, you want to make sure you're turning things off beginning on their 7 Dawn turn to ensure they don't benefit from the Rebecca combo. Against the OP10 Yellow Kid leader, you want to turn things off beginning on their 7 Dawn turn to ensure they can't recover life with the Trafalgar Law or trash yours with the new 8-cost Captain Kid. And finally, for the Red Green Smoker, you want to turn things off beginning at 7 Dawn to ensure they can't use Ben Beckman to trash one of your cards or Hody Jones to rest them. Moving on to gameplay, I figured we should start with our most difficult matchup, as a lot of Blackbeard players struggle with Doffy, and we have an abysmal 29% win rate against him. You might be wondering why that is, as the majority of his cards have on-play effects, and we can turn this off throughout the whole game. But it turns out he doesn't need on-play effects in order to win this matchup, as by using his leader ability, swinging 7k, and bringing out a 4-cost Warlords card every turn, we can quickly fall behind on resources. Now why is that? Well, outside of the 6-cost Liberation, this deck focuses on removing 1 card at a time, and if he's constantly bringing out a 4-cost Warlords card, this means we're going to have to focus all of our energy on that, and we're not going to be able to threaten his life at the same time. And because of his leader ability, we have to shut off their on-play effects beginning on their 3 Dawn turn and continue this to the end of the game, which significantly shrinks our hand size. But enough of this negativity, how do we beat a Doflamingo player? Well, we know on turn 1 they're going to bring out Perona, organize the top 5 cards of their deck in a way that their leader ability is going to work throughout the next 2 turns. But after their first turn, we're going to shut off their on-play effects, which means after this they're going to be playing blind, and we're banking on them pulling up a few cards that cannot be played with their leader ability. This brings up the second problem, which is the 2-cost Marshall D. Teach. He has the activate main effect that you can place 1 card from your hand to the top of your deck, and then give 2 rested Dawn to one of your characters or leaders. This means not only can they recycle Dawn to have stronger hits, but they can also place one of their 4-cost Warlords cards from their hand onto the top of their deck, ensuring that it comes out with their leader ability. This leader is also very scary if we come down to 0 life, as they have access to this 2-cost event which allows them to get around any blockers. Our goal against this leader is to remove his Warlords cards as quickly as they come onto the field, using Doc Q and Van Augur, Finger Pistol, Liberation, and a few of our other removal options to clear the board, make it to our 10 Dawn turn. I end up going first here, and looking at my starting hand, I'm okay with it, as I have Doc Q and Stronger if I want to remove a Marshall D. Teach early on, I have a Hachinosu to play on my first turn, and I have Kuzan and Liberation for later on. First things first, I drop down my 1-cost stage, and then I think about activating it, but there's scenarios where I want every single one of these cards in my hand, so I figured I'm going to hold off for this turn and just get it on the field. The enemy Doffy starts as expected, dropping down a 1-cost Perona and then rearranging the top 5 cards of his deck. Now at 3 Dawn I have a few options. Since I already have my stage in the field, I could discard a card and look for either Lafitte or This Is My Age to add another card to my hand. But I want to stay as healthy as I can, so I figured if I put down this Doc Q and get rid of his Perona, I'm giving him a target to swing at rather than my life, which might help me stay healthier in the future. And I also get to draw a card when he's KO'd. And if he did decide to ignore him and swing at life instead, I can look for a Van Augur to combine with my Doc Q to start removing some 4-cost characters of his. But before I do anything, I use my 1-cost stage, discarding a card and adding Lafitte to my hand. And since I know that blue players run some cards that have triggers that bottom deck characters, before I play down anything, I'm going to attack with my leader. And I decided to attach 1 to leader and swing 6 before dropping down my Doc Q, but looking back, there also would have been nothing wrong with just attacking 5k and then dropping down both Doc Q and Lafitte. He counters with a 2k, so then I drop down Doc Q, get rid of Perona, turn off his abilities, and then end my turn. For his 4 Dawn turn, he attaches 2 to leader, swinging 7k at life, ignoring my Doc Q, and then bringing out a 4-cost Edward Weevil. Since I'm now at my 5 Dawn turn and he didn't remove my Doc Q, I would love to find a Van Augur and use him in combination to remove this Edward Weevil. Unfortunately, I don't find him, but we do find a Liberation, which we can use instead. And so I activate that first, use its effect to remove the Edward Weevil, swing 5k with my leader, and then use my 1 remaining Dawn to drop down a Lafitte. I also then turn off his on plays, and it's easy to forget to do this, so make sure either after you're attacking or before the end of your turn, you always double check to make sure it's already been turned off. And you can already see why this matchup is difficult, as we're only in our 3rd turn, but since we're constantly discarding cards, we're down to 2 cards already. To start his 6th Dawn turn, he drops down the 4-cost Boa blocker, and luckily for us, her on-play effect doesn't activate, as if it did, he would have enough Dawn to activate his leader ability as well. Since he doesn't, he just swings 7k at life. And we can't block this, so we take the hit, but luckily for us, it triggers a Finger Pistol, which allows us to remove the Boa and is our first step to getting back into this game. At 7 Dawn, we now have some different options, and I'm going to start using the 1-cost Lafitte to see if we can find either a 10-cost Blackbeard or another card we're looking for. Unfortunately, we don't land on Blackbeard, but with 6 Dawn remaining and This Is My Age, we could pick that up, activate it, and still have enough Dawn for Kuzan. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. And using this, we are able to pick up our first Blackbeard, which is very important, so we add that to our hand, fill up our trash, and play down our Kuzan. Oh, actually, I decided to attack first, which is good in practice since you can avoid any triggers, but since Kuzan is immune to all of them, it didn't actually matter. We then finally claim our first life of the game, only took us 4 turns to do so, drop down our Kuzan, and then use Hachinosu to look for a better card. And this was actually a difficult decision, as you always want multiple teaches, having a 2k is great in your hand, but also at 9 Dawn next turn, This Is My Age could also be nice to look for something else. I settled on This Is My Age, adding it to my hand, before thinking about which of these cards I wanted to discard for my leader ability. Since I have a Kuzan on the field, I'm going to discard my Burgess and then use This Is My Age to hopefully find either another or a Kuzan in my next turn. And it's here where the Doffy makes a big mistake. He activates Gravity Blade, but Kuzan is immune. If he would have held on to this and waited for my 2 Burgesses to be out on the field, he would have been in a really good spot. Now unfortunately this game was feeling really good, but after this turn I didn't know if it was worth including the entire video, as a mistake like this really gives me a leg up that I shouldn't have. But I just wanted to show you the cool combo that I did in the next turn, and then we'll move on to the next game. He swings at life and I take the hit, adding a Jesus Burgess to my hand. I then draw and add a Kuzan to my hand as well. And with 9 Dawn available, I decided to play This Is My Age to see if I can find another Burgess. And I do, so everything in my plan is coming into motion. First, I don't want them sent to the bottom of the deck because of any trigger, so I start things off by swinging 5k with Blackbeard and then 5k with Kuzan. I then activate Kuzan's effect, trashing him and bringing out a Burgess, before using my remaining 8 Dawn to bring out 2 additional Burgesses and having 3 9k powered characters all on the field. Fast forwarding ahead, I was able to bring out my Teach, swing 3 times, and then they surrendered. Our second matchup was against PLuffy, which can still be challenging but is much easier than Doflamingo. So what is our goal for this leader? Well, number 1 is turning off their on plays beginning at 7 Dawn, as we don't want them to use Luffy Taro to chain out multiple characters, Sanji to gain rush, 9 cost Luffy to gain rush, or use 9 cost Lin to both gain life and disrupt our board. But you already knew that. Our more specific goal is to control the board and make sure they don't get any value from Sangoro, who when attacking allows them to draw a card. I don't like my starting hand here, so I decide to mulligan and have some good options to play on turn 1. Since he didn't play anything, I want to use my Lafitte, as it will force him to either attack him or allow me to keep him on the field if he goes for life instead. I then find a Kuzan, add him to my hand, and decide to end my turn. Of course, I know probably a Zoro is going to come out here, but it's not worth discarding a card at this point just to turn off a search effect. He then plays down Trafalgar, adding a 2k counter Sanji to his hand, before attaching the rest to his leader and swinging at life. And of course we don't counter, so we add a Burgess to our hand before drawing a Kuzan for turn. Now I'm not sure what I want to do next. I can either drop down a Burgess, as I know PLuffy has no way of removing him, or I could use Lafitte alongside my stage. While I think about it, I decide to just swing 5k with leader first. And he counters out. And even though I don't have anything in my trash right now, I decide to just get Burgess on the field and keep him there for later. And I don't think I'll be needing both of these Kuzans, so I trash one to turn off his on-play effects and end my turn. He then starts his turn off by swinging 5k, but I'm feeling pretty confident with my hand size right now, so I decide to counter out, as I know this leader can bring out some powerful characters that I won't be able to counter out of later. He then drops down the 7 cost Luffy Taro and ends his turn. And right here I had 2 thought processes. I could drop down Kuzan and then play my 1 cost stage and look for another card, or I could drop down Burgess, play my stage, and then also activate Lafitte, give me a higher chance of finding a 10 cost Teach for later on. And since both of those options have me playing my stage, I figured I should start here and see if I can find a Teach before making my next decision. Unfortunately we don't, but we do find a Van Augur, and with the Liberation already in my hand, there's a play that I'm starting to think of that I could do next turn to get rid of this Luffy. But it will require my Kuzan to be on the field, so rather than use my Lafitte, I put down Kuzan and end my turn. But of course not before turning off his on-play effects, and if you find yourself consistently forgetting to do this, you can always do it before you attack with your leader, just to make sure that you don't forget. And I discarded Van Augur because I'm going to bring him back with Kuzan next turn. To start off his 9 Dawn turn, he swings 5k, which I'm just going to accept, followed up by an 8k by Luffy Taro, which again, I can't counter out of. Luckily this triggers a This Is My Age, but we still can't find a 10 cost Teach, but at least we add another card to our hand. He then drops down a 9 cost Lin and ends his turn. We're now at 8 Dawn, and we still don't have a Teach in our hand, so that's going to be our number 1 priority, along with getting rid of this Luffy Taro. To start, we swing 5k with Kuzan, which gets a counter. We then activate his effect, draw a card, and bring back a Van Augur. We can then activate Van Augur's effect, giving -3 to this Luffy and making him a 4 cost, which means the Liberation will take him out. I then decide to swing 5k with leader, seeing if he counters out, which he chooses to do. And since I just attacked, I activate my leader ability, and I don't see much value from this Dock Q, so I decide to send him into the trash. I then activate my stage, as I'm looking for a 10 cost Teach, and I discard a Lafitte since I already have one on the field. We then do not find a Teach, but I find another Burgess, which I add to my hand. Now, in hindsight, I think the best play would have been to either use one or both of my Lafitte's in order to ensure I have a 10 cost Teach for next turn. But I was feeling lucky, and considering I hadn't seen one yet, I liked the odds of using my Hachinosu next turn to find one and then play it down. And so instead I go for the aggressive route, dropping down a 4 cost Burgess before swinging 7k with my 1 already on the field, which takes a life, so now both Luffy and I are at 2 life. He then begins his first 10 Dawn turn, attaching 2 to Luffy and then swinging at our Burgess. Even though we only have 4 cards in hand, I believe this is worth a counter, since after this he'll only have Charlotte Lin to attack with, which should ensure that at least one of our rested characters survives. So we discard a Burgess, and he immediately swings 9k with Lin, which we're not going to counter out of and go down to 1 card. He then spends 7 Dawn on dropping down Luffy Taro, leaving 1 Dawn up, which likely means he's got a Gum Gum Giant waiting in his hand. This means any one large hit, either against Linlin or against life, he'll be able to defend from. And now at 10 Dawn, our number one goal is to drop out our 10 cost Teach. So we're hoping we can use this stage, look at the top 3 cards, and find one there. So I discard a Burgess and cross my fingers, but unfortunately, we don't find anything useful. And while this means we can't play a Blackbeard this turn, we're not out of luck yet, as we still have our Lafitte that allow us to search the top 5 cards of our deck. So we activate his effect, look at the top 5 cards, and we still don't find a Blackbeard. Overall, this is pretty unlucky, as if you go through our life, our starting hand, and all of our different searches, we've gone through about 33 cards, so not to see a single Blackbeard is pretty surprising. But in these type of scenarios, you can either complain about it or make the best of what you got, and that's what I'm going to do here, grabbing this Kuzan. With no other search options available, I decide my best play is this Kuzan and Vasco shot, which will cost a total of 7 Dawn and give me 2 Dawn to work with when attacking. I start with a 5k swing for my leader, and he discards 1 card to counter out. I then attach 1 Dawn to Van Augur and swing 7k, to which he activates Gum Gum Giant to counter the hit. I then took a little bit of time to think here, as I wasn't sure if I wanted to play Kuzan and Vasco shot, or just play Kuzan and give 3 Dawn to my Burgess to then try and take out Linlin. But one thing I noticed is he discarded a 2k counter with Gum Gum Giant, which you normally discard a 0 counter or 1k counter that you don't need anymore. So the fact that he discarded a 2k counter makes me think that perhaps his hand was full of them. Because of this, I decided to attack the 5k power leader rather than Linlin, but unfortunately throughout all this thinking, I forgot that I had 8 Dawn and not 7, and so I could have attached 1 to Burgess and swung 9k instead of 8k. And he does counter out with 2 2k counters, so that 1 extra k would have forced another card from his hand, but there's nothing we can do about it now. I then play out Kuzan, followed by Vasco shot, who isn't Blackbeard by any means, but at least can stop 1 hit from coming through. And with both Luffy and myself only having a few cards in our hands, I could feel the game will be ended in the next few turns, and so I'd rather keep some 2k counters rather than Van Augur. I also decide I want to activate Kuzan's effect now, so I can swing with my 8k power Burgess next turn. And we finally find our first Blackbeard and end our turn. Luffy starts with an 8k swing, and while we could counter out of this, I want to wait and see what he decides to do. And with another 2k counter in our hand, we're feeling quite safe, but if that wasn't the case, let me break down what I was thinking about. And for the sake of this argument, let's assume we didn't pick up another 2k counter and it was a Liberation or some other card that we couldn't use. To start, let's assess the scenario. We have 1 life remaining, meaning 2 successful hits will take us out of the game. He has 3 cards that can attack, and after attaching 3 to Luffy, he has 7 Dawn remaining. Linlin has a base power of 9k, meaning she won't need any Dawn investment to be a threat here, but Trafalgar Law only has 2k. But with 7 Dawn remaining, he could turn Trafalgar Law into a 9k power character as well. And with only 1 blocker on the field, this means we have to stop 1 attack with a blocker, 1 attack with counter, and then we have to let 1 go through to come down to 0 life. And with the current cards in our hand, the only way we can stop a 9k power attack is if our face down life card is another 1 or 2k counter. But that's a risk you don't want to take, so in this exact scenario, I'd recommend using both 2k counters here, deflecting 1 attack, and then you can use your blocker to stop another, letting 1 go through and coming down to 0 life. But coming back to the actual game, since I have 3 2k counters in my hand, I'm actually not worried about this breakdown of Dawn, and so I'll allow this hit to go through, let him try to go for game, and then do my own counter attack next turn. So I take the life, it triggers that this is my age, so I look at the top 3 cards and add a Lafitte for another 1k counter. He then attacks 9k with Linlin, and while I could counter out of this, if I do that, the Luffy player will know that I'm not going to lose this turn, as I still have a blocker up, so he might use some of that Dawn to drop down a blocker of his own and make it more difficult for me to KO him. So instead, I'll use my blocker and entice him to try and swing a final blow with this Trafalgar, which he decides to do, attaching all 7 Dawn and swinging for 9k, which we're able to counter out of with 2 of our counters and the Lafitte. And now with only 2 life against my 2 10k power Burgesses, a 6k power Van Augur, my leader, and 10 Dawn available, this Luffy player admits defeat and concedes the game. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you found this video helpful and it's given you the tools you need to start mastering Blackbeard. I'll catch you next time.